In the desert oasis where stories ignite, Skip's little bar, a beacon of light. From the Coachella Valley stars to cool everyday Joes, join Patrick and Randy, let the stories flow. At Big Conversations Little Bar, the magic spreads near and far. Backed by the McCallum Theater's grace, celebrate the voices that shape this place.
From the coveted corner booth in a little bar at the center of the Coachella Valley universe, welcome to another Big Conversation with Patrick Evans and Randy Florence, presented by the McCallum Theater. Visit McCallumTheater.org or reach the box office at 760-340-2787. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Howard. Yes, we are here in the very coveted corner booth of Skip Page's Little Bar, the center of culture and activity in Palm Desert, California.
Excuse me while I leave.
This is Big Conversations Little Bar, and we're delighted to have you along with us. My name is Patrick Evans, and I'm here with my co-host and good friend and sidekick and the silver daddy of all podcasts, Mr. Randy Florence.
It gets longer every time. We're not going to have time for our guests by the time.
Eventually, well, you'll know when we have a terrible guest when the intro just continues, and then we say thank you very much to our guest who could not be here today.
That's right. We have no more questions.
But today we have we rarely invite people back twice, but Cary was with us early on.
Yep.
Perhaps in the first season.
Early in the first season, I think. Might have been the first 10 or 11 episodes.
And so Cary Baker's here, and it was funny because I hope I'm remembering this right. We always ask people before we go in, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And one of the things you said was, I'm working on a book, but I don't really want to get into it.
And this has been a running gag on the podcast.
And then as soon as you put the headset on, like, and Cary said, hey, I'm working on a book. And like, I thought we couldn't talk about it.
Because my question to you is, how's retirement going? And now we can say retirement's not going well because you've been busy.
If you mention retirement to my wife, she will laugh.
Remind people of your background, because you've been a writer since you were basically a teenager.
I was a writer, and then I was a music industry guy, and then I was a writer. Yeah. So, I started writing, and it goes back to this book, but I don't want to get ahead of the narrative. But some of the music that I saw in Chicago, blues, for instance, really inspired me to write up stories. And I had a good journalism class in high school. I majored in journalism. I became a freelance writer for about 4 years. And suddenly I was on the music industry's radar, and I got a job in L.A. I think I'll do music industry publicity for 2 years. Well, 2 turned into 4, turned into 5, turned into 9, turned into 40 years.
Wow. And
finally in 2022, decided to close my PR shop. And I, not for money, but for love, while I still have time and presence of mind, I decided to write again.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been doing.
Did you really plan on retiring, or did you know that you were just moving into your next thing?
I think we called it that, and Variety wrote a story about it that's easily Googleable. But I'm the kind of person who needs structure, who needs a little bit of purpose in life, and writing is something that I wanted to do.
Well, we're glad you did, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
The book is called Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music, and this takes you right back to kind of your childhood, where your dad took you down to a little marketplace near downtown Chicago,
that's right.
Where there were street musicians, and that obviously left a big impression on you.
So my dad was the son of Eastern European immigrants who had come to Chicago through New York. And he kept on talking about this Maxwell Street place. And finally he told me about age 16, I'm taking you to Maxwell Street. He said, believe me, you'll only want to go there once. And I thought, okay, whatever. Cool.
Was he right?
Well, I was there every following Sunday that I could. So we get there, we park the car. It's right around Chicago's Loop and right around the University of Illinois Chicago campus. Park our car in the campus. Walk across Roosevelt Road, which is Main Street, that in Halstead, and I hear this steel on steel, just this slide guitar on a steel guitar, and I thought, Dad, we got to follow the music here. So we did, and to my father it was nothing in particular, but to me it was connection with another world. My father had grown up poor in the tenements of the west side of Chicago, but he became a fairly successful doctor, and I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, a little bit of a sheltered life. And I knew about blues. I heard blues on FM radio, FM rock radio would play Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead, and then they'd say, and now Muddy Waters. And I think, I like this. And I realized at some point that by buying a few of these records, that some of these record companies were in Chicago. Chess Records, home of Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, for instance, VJ Records, Brunswick, Mercury, Alligator. So I thought, well, I just saw my life come together in that moment. But so we get to Maxwell Street, and there is this blind street singer. He's got a Dixie cup safety pin to his lapel, and he is playing this version of John Henry, the old folk work song that just goes on forever. And he's adding local references. Got the shoes off of Maxwell, got the dress off of Halstead, and people kept on passing him, but Dad, we got to hold up. And finally, he took a break to catch his breath. I got his phone number, and I called him up one day. He's there every Sunday playing on the streets, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, not so much for a street singer. So I called him on a weekday, and I said, "Do you have time to do an interview?" He said, "Do I have time?" So I interviewed him by phone, and I typed it up on a typewriter and sent it with a stamp and an envelope to the Chicago Reader at a suburban mailbox, and it went downtown to the Reader. I used to see the Reader on the Northwestern University campus. I would just take walks there along the lake, and a few weeks later, there it was in print. And they didn't even tell me they were accepting it. They just ran it. And a few weeks later, I got a check. They pay me to do this?
That had to be kind of a jolt to see that in writing for the first time.
So, I was into rock and roll and all kinds of music too, but I wrote about Blind Arvella Gray, and then I discovered that there was a label, a record company in my home suburb of Chicago that was kind of into folklore. And I thought, folklore, this guy, I made an introduction, and we got to make this guy's only album. I mean, I hope that he didn't die in splendor, but I hope that I may have helped him in some way with exposure and getting his music archived. So Blind Arvella Gray became a major figure in my life.
What was his? He was a street performer. He was a busker.
Mm-hmm. I'd never heard that term actually until we had you on, which, by the way, was episode 7 of our season 1.
Was it?
And all of them are archived on our website, bigconversationslittlebar.com, if you'd like to go back and listen to Cary's first episode to give you a little more context. But, yeah, I didn't know the term busking or busker. And you said it a couple times, and I was like, what the hell is that?
I didn't know it either at the time. He was a street singer.
Yeah.
And I don't think he knew the word. But so I graduate college. I go to school in Illinois, and when I graduate, I moved back to the city of Chicago, and a punk new wave magazine called Trouser Press calls me up and says, "Is Milwaukee anywhere near Chicago?" And I said, "Yeah, why? I could be there in about 90 minutes. What do you need?" They said, "Well, there is a punk band, but they play on acoustic instruments, so they're kind of a punk folk band. And by the way, they're called the Violent Femmes, and we need a story, and we need it like right away." I said, "Can I listen to the music?" They said, "We don't have time."
Just go.
So the band had a plan, though. It turns out that they were buskers in the streets of Milwaukee before they were discovered, and they were discovered in a very interesting way. They used to like to play underneath movie marquees in downtown Milwaukee, and one night the Pretenders were playing at a theater in Milwaukee, and they were playing under the marquee during sound check, and Chrissy Hind and James Honeyman Scott come out, and they say, "You guys are good. Would you like to open for us?"
Wow.
They're like, "Who are you?" They've never heard of the Pretenders. But yes, they did. And so the Pretenders had a touring opening act that they were on the road with, but the Violent Femmes from Milwaukee got to play like 3 songs before the opening act. And, the people in Milwaukee were very impressed. The street guys, on a big stage. And that was their story. And they played a few songs for me, seeing that I hadn't gotten the album in the mail yet. And you couldn't send the SoundCloud or a Spotify at that point.
Right.
So just one other major event then, and my kind of busking orientation is so I get an offer to move to Los Angeles from Chicago to work for a label called IRS, home of the Go-Go's, REM, the Alarm, Flesh Tones, Fine Young Cannibals, Concrete Blonde. And I take the obligatory, just move to L.A., walk down Venice Beach Boardwalk. And I'm not thinking anything. I'm kind of looking at the scenery and, looking at the ocean and, looking at all the things you look at. And all of a sudden, my ear is drawn by this voice that just sounds like Otis Redding or Sam Cooke. And I turn around, and it's this old black guy with a guitar and a big white beard. It turns out his name was Ted Hawkins. And Ted was, soon after that, discovered by a Geffen Records A&R representative who would sign Beck to Geffen. And he had to convince David Geffen to sign this street singer. It wasn't going to be a big money maker. It was just going to be one of those kind of credible things you do out of passion. And so this guy had an album on Geffen. And there was also a singer on the street that I took note of named Harry Perry. And he's kind of more famous for his look. He dressed like a Sikh with a turban and roller skates and kind of an Eddie Halen style electric guitar with kind of a target painted on it. So I took note of him as well.
And so when you describe a lot of interesting characters in the book, and we're going to get into that, but when you found somebody like that who had a look, was he trying to separate himself, or was he just that's who he was?
Well, I knew that I'd arrived in La La Land then and there.
Right.
Certainly not the Midwest anymore.
One walk down the Venice Boardwalk, and you realize just how far left you've gone. I mean, you are on the very left coast.
Well, that is certainly correct. So, he had a look. I don't know what the origin of that was. I mean, we talked for the book, but somehow or other, that was the way he presented himself day after day.
So, one of the things I loved about the book was the structure of it, the way you put it together, geographies and stuff like that. Can you talk about how you formed that?
Well, I thought I'd start. Well, first of all, it started with a foreword by a Grammy Award-winning writer named Dom Flemons.
And that was almost an amazing chapter in and of itself.
I called him up and asked if he would do that, and we actually happened to be heading to Nashville for a convention the week following that, and had breakfast. And a couple days later, there was the perfect foreword for my book. And he talked about, people listening in Palm Desert will appreciate this. He talks about busking in 102, 103 degree weather in Phoenix. And I've seen a busker or two, one in Palm Springs along the Starbucks on Tahquitz, and one, oddly enough, coming out of Yoga 6 in La Quinta, just in the parking lot. A violinist with a little dog.
So let's clarify something for us, people who don't know what busking is.
Yeah.
What makes that different than just some street person holding a guitar?
It doesn't really. It's a word that's come to be used for street musicians. It comes from an old Spanish word, buscar, which means to conspire, to try, to conquer. And I guess that's what, ultimately street singers are trying to do.
Did most of these people know that's what they were doing? Did they define themselves that way?
They came to it for different reasons. For a blind man in Chicago who had his eyes shot out and a few fingers, he's lucky he found a trade, and he's lucky that it was a trade that got him, into the books and onto record. Not everybody was so lucky who, was blind. But you go with one of the interesting people that I interviewed was I guess you'd call him a folk and blues singer named Fantastic Negrito. And the thing about him is that he was signed to Interscope Records. Now, everybody who signs to Interscope is going to be a hit recording artist. Snoop Dogg, 9 Inch Nails, Dr. Dre, No Doubt. Everybody becomes a star. Except for this guy named Xavier, who signed as kind of a Prince-type R&B artist to Interscope. And he didn't become a star, and they kicked him off the label, and he went back to his home of Oakland and became a pot farmer because that was newly legal. So he's a pot farmer, but he thinks, I kind of miss music a little bit. And he goes out onto the streets of Oakland and discovers that he's a whole different kind of artist. He's no longer this Prince-like R&B singer, but instead he's this kind of folk and blues artist. So he gave himself a new name, Fantastic Negrito. And with that, he's gone on to win, I think, 3 Grammys, some blues and Americana awards.
And he took some abuse over his name a little bit. He talked about that in the book.
Yeah. Well, calling himself Fantastic Negrito was kind of, kind of going out on a limb.
Yeah,
but,
pointing the finger at people. Yeah.
I asked him what he wanted to be called at the beginning of the interview, and he said, "Oh, Fantastic Negritos." I finally did meet him in Nashville this past September at a Starbucks, and introduced myself, and Fantastic Negrito. But so for him, it was a midlife thing. For others, it's the beginning of the career. For others, it's something that they went back and did to redefine themselves. I'm trying to think of another example. One great example of a busker who became somebody. Peter Case had a group called the Plimsolls. They had a couple of K-rock hits. He was in a band before that called The Nerves. But he was just a guy in Buffalo who played guitar, Buffalo, New York. And as a teenager, he did something we all think about, but whoever does this, put his thumb out on the highway and hitchhiked from Buffalo to San Francisco.
Wow.
Homeless, and lived in a rusted out car in a junkyard in Sausalito while he busked in front of on Fisherman's Wharf and in front of the City Lights bookstore, and gradually met the entire San Francisco scene. Found his future bandmates, and one day he says he was busking out in front of the City Lights bookstore when Allen Ginsberg, the poet, came out and sang along with him.
Sang with him.
Wow.
Things like that happen.
So give us some of the characters in the book. I mean, all of them to some degree or another. Every chapter you wrote was talking about characters, but some of these people were really out there, and they didn't necessarily want to do anything more than what they were doing.
Well, one such person is Wildman Fisher. Wildman Fisher has one album out on Frank Zappa's Bizarre, or maybe Straight Records, two labels, Bizarre and Straight. And he was discovered singing out in front of the Roxy and the Whiskey and on Hollywood Boulevard. But he would often take his act into restaurants and record stores. He was hard to miss. He passed on, and I wasn't able to interview him, but I found some eyewitnesses, including Billy Mooney from Lost in Space.
Oh, yeah.
Who then went on to become a producer for Rhino Records and produced his second album after Frank Zappa produced his first. But he was downright mentally ill, and his street performances reflected that. He wasn't just putting on an act. In fact, he had the chance to play the Shrine Auditorium, but went out the side door, and everybody wondered, where'd this guy go? Oh, playing outside.
Wow.
To a crowd of nobody and at the Shrine Auditorium.
A lot of the buskers were they were doing that, but they were also doing gigs and stuff on the side. Who is the biggest, in your opinion, the biggest success that came out of straight busking?
Well, one good example, although I didn't get to interview him, but I found an eyewitness again, as I did when people were either inaccessible or deceased, is Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello had signed to a label called Stiff Records in 1977. It was kind of an eccentric label. Nick Lowe was on it, Reckless Eric. Eccentric would be the word for it. Punk, yes, but kind of British pub rock. Anyway, at some point, Stiff became distributed by CBS Records. But CBS didn't automatically pick up Elvis Costello. So the CBS convention came to London, and Elvis Costello decided to busk. He decided to play outside, and he was singing a song, Watching the Detectives. And sure enough, maybe not detectives, but police came and arrested him. And an A&R guy from the Burbank office of Warner, the head American office of Warner Brothers Records, happened to see this and convinced his bosses to sign Elvis Costello, who became a respectable enough star to this date.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What made you decide to write a book about these particular folks?
Well, I was going to actually, and this will be of interest, this is obscure, but this will be of interest to desert people, is I was going to write a book about the California music of the California desert. And I thought, well, gosh, there was the Joshua Tree scene and what's his name, Graham Parsons from the Flying Burrito Brothers and all of that. And, Pappy's is a bit of a story. And Victoria Williams lives up there now. And then I was thinking about Palm Springs, and you've got the Rat Pack, and you've got Peggy Lee and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Then you've got the Palm Desert grunge generator party scene. I never went to one of those, but I'm thinking, I'm a journalist. I can get some good stories, and I'd seen the documentary on it. Besides, and then I'm also thinking, well, Frank Zappa's from Lancaster, and
I didn't know
I'm
that.
sorry, Captain Beefheart's from Lancaster, and Frank Zappa's from Palmdale, or maybe the other way around. And I thought, well, that's
Either way, that's a good place to be from.
Yeah, it's a good place to be from.
Either one of them.
Exactly. So I'm thinking, well, that's not quite, it's a bit of a drive from our desert, but it's California desert. So I happened to mention this to Bruce Fessier, of all people, and he said, well, that's interesting. I've got interviews with all these Palm Springs people you mentioned. I thought, well, there goes the book. And I called my publisher the next day and said, I met a guy, venerable 40-year reporter on the entertainment beat and an editor of the Desert Sun here in Palm Springs, who has all these interviews, and I think he should write this book. And my publisher said, well, there's no book being written that isn't being written by somebody else, but if you want to think of some other topics, go ahead. So I started calling, I thought, well, biography is probably the way to go, and I started calling managers of legacy rock artists, blues artists, folk artists, older artists. And I happen to have a friend from college in Illinois who lives up in Big Bear, and she manages the estates of many famous blues artists. And I thought she might just have an artist in need of a biography. And sure enough, she did. And that was Ted Hawkins, who I just talked about, the guy on Venice Boardwalk who sounded like Sam Cooke or Otis Redding. And so I called up my publisher, who ended up not being my publisher, but that's we'll get to that in a minute. And I said, well, how about a book about Ted Hawkins? And he's sitting in Texas, and he said, who's Ted Hawkins? And I said, well, Ted Hawkins was a street singer, a busker. There's a pause. He said, well, what about street singers plural, buskers plural? I'm like, I could do that. In fact, I really could do that. I have a lot of other stories, and I know where to go for the rest of them. So that became the book. And I hired a literary agent to see if he could get me a better deal than this guy, with all due respect to this guy. And sure enough, he did. I'm with a great publishing house called Jawbone Press, who came along. This guy had been selling the book, pitching the book for months, and finally Jawbone Press. I knew exactly who they were. They had books on Kathy Valentine of the Go-Go's, Dan Hicks, Cheap Trick, producers, memoirs, Crowded House. It was exactly the publisher I thought I wanted to be with. And, tasty rosters don't always mean, big budgets, but that wasn't the point of this. Purpose, legacy in this world. And, I finally came back to, or Jawbone Press came back to me and they said, we'd love a book about buskers. And it's helpful, they added, that you, meaning me, have experience in public relations, because we know you'll know how to pitch the book.
And you have. This thing has taken off. Is it a surprise to you? I mean, I think you were recently with NPR talking about the book, and maybe even were Book of the Month or something like that with NPR.
Book of the Day.
Book of the Day.
I'll take it. The next day was a different
book of the decade.
But
he needs 30 more Book of the Day interviews.
Exactly.
Then it'll be Book of the Month.
I plan to write them. But,
there you go.
But were you surprised how this kind of took off?
I was flabbergasted. Yes, I pitched NPR thinking, yeah, right, and it took them a while. And then when I least expected it, I woke up to an email from the guy I pitched saying, "Are we to be available next Tuesday?" Let me check my calendar.
Yes.
I think very possibly could do that. After
no, sorry, I'm on Big Conversations Little Bar.
That's right. Well, this is gonna cement the success for sure.
No doubt.
But I knew from my public relations years that the two things that really tip the sales needle are NPR and also CBS Sunday Mornings.
Right.
Those two things in particular really tip the needle. And you will sell records. And sure enough, my book went from like 200,000 in the pantheon of all books on sale to about number 20,000 from 200,000. I thought, well, that's good. And then there are subcategories that I never realized there are in book sale ranks on Amazon: blues, ethnomusicology, music history, and I was single digit in those. I'm like, whoa, NPR works. But the main thing is that I'd been pitching many worthy artists, and some unworthy ones, but mainly worthy ones, to the New York Times, to Rolling Stone, to NPR, to CBS Sunday Mornings. And I didn't get CBS Sunday Mornings with this book or anything, but to be on NPR was a real honor, and to be the artist instead of the artist representative, the artist support, was a real first for me.
Because so often you were the publicist guy, and so you were shepherding artists around. And now,
one of my earliest lessons in PR 101 was, oh, get out of the photo, Cary. You're the publicist. Oh, get out of the photo. We've used all the executives at the labels I work for, and, oh, Cary, you want to get out of the photo. Publicists aren't in photos. So, that's cool. I mean, it was a good job, and it got me working with some artists that I hope I made a worthy contribution to. R.E.M., Bonnie Raitt, the Smithereens, got them on their first Saturday Night Live. Who?
The Mavericks?
The Mavericks,
yeah.
Yes, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very proud of the work that I did, but I was also happy to switch gears while still lucid enough and ambitious enough to want to create my own art.
And do you consider yourself a writer now with this? Well, you were writing forever, but are you going to be an author going forward?
I think once you wrote a book, and it gets published,
you're an author.
Yeah,
well,
you will be an author.
Yes, I am, and I'll give you the same answer I may have given you 2 years ago.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about my next project. It is a biography. A biography is a deep dive, especially when it's of a person who's an octogenarian, musical legend, and a lot of the people surrounding him have passed on. So it's a deep dive.
Has this book caused people to reach out to you and offer you suggestions on what your next book might be?
Actually, yes, and I've gotten some freelance writing articles out of it too as well. I pitched a story to Spin magazine. I had been friends with its founder way long ago in the 80s, Bob Guccione Jr. Imagine that, the
penthouse,
the suburban son of a middle-class suburban psychiatrist in Chicago, and the son of a
Penthouse magazine.
Penthouse magazine,
exactly.
Yeah.
So, we took a liking to one another, and he actually cooked dinner for me a couple of times, once in New York, once in L.A. at a friend's house. And I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he's resurrected the magazine. And when I pitched it, he said, "Well, how about a story about the book, and then how about you interview a busker?" And I just did this afternoon, a busker in Boston, a young busker, who thick Boston accent, and a favorite of the people at Spin. And we talked a little about busking. It was kind of a back and forth interview. He interviewed me a bit, I interviewed him. But so I'm doing stories for freelance articles like I used to in my 20s. And there's no money in that, but I really enjoy doing it, and I'm glad to be at a stage in my life where I can.
But it's also great to just keep the craft up and make sure the mental tool is still sharp when you're in between projects. We have to take a very quick break and acknowledge our presenting sponsor, the McCallum Theater. We'd like to hear a word from them.
The McCallum Theater's 2024-2025 season is on sale now. The world's top artists, from jazz, pop, classical, and comedy to the best of Broadway, only at the Valley's favorite place for great entertainment. Tickets are on sale now at the McCallum Theater box office, by phone, or online at mccallumtheater.org. Tickets sell quickly, so order yours today. A new, exciting season only at the McCallum. The McCallum Theater's 2024-2025 season is on sale now.
Your entertainment, your theater, the McCallum Theater, our presenting sponsor for Big Conversations Little Bar. We are here with Cary Baker, author of the book Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music. And, you told us some stories about buskers who did get discovered, got an album made, and some that went, Elvis Costello, well more than that. But a lot of these guys and gals, they live kind of a hard life. I mean, street musicians,
no question,
often that's the sum total of their experience. So
that is.
Tell me a little bit about. I don't know, it's the dark side of it, but it's a tough life.
Yeah. Well, there was a San Antonio busker who played an oil drum. I don't mean calypso steel drums with melodies. I mean an oil drum, and he would bang on it. His name was Bongo Joe, and he could be seen. He died in I forget exactly when he died, but he was a street singer and oil drum banger for all of his career in San Antonio. Finally, a folk musicologist found him and brought him to a folk music blues label called Arhoolie Records in Berkeley, California, and he got to make a record. But I would say he lived kind of a hard life. He got arrested a few times. In fact, I spoke to quite a few people who had been either accosted by the law or something happened to them. Mary Lou Lord was a particular favorite. She was a Boston-based busker who was famous for playing outside of South by Southwest because she could never get hired to do an official showcase for all the attending music people. But she was such an omnipresence, playing out on 6th Street, 6th and Brazos in downtown Austin, and people would see her and wonder who she was. And Billy Bragg, himself a busker, came and played with her one night. But she had lots of stories about being homeless. She went out to London to try her luck at busking, and had some weird things happen. A guy peed in her guitar case for one.
Not much of a tip.
Not much of a tip.
Never mind. Never mind.
She finally did become kind of an indie rock, legend in her own right. I spoke with. I want to mention a couple of desert people that I interviewed that I wouldn't have known about if I didn't live here. Perhaps as being buskers. One of them is Victoria Williams, who lives up in Joshua Tree these days. She has a couple of albums out on Geffen Records, and she also had contracted MS, the disease MS, and accordingly, some friends of hers, and she had good friends in the business, started a foundation called Sweet Relief, and it's currently helping victims of the LA fires. But so Victoria Williams started her career playing right alongside Harry Perry and Ted Hawkins on Venice Boardwalk, prior to being discovered and turned by Geffen Records and then a couple of other labels. Tim Easton lived in Joshua Tree for a while. He owned an Airbnb that my wife and I stayed at a time or two, and he's busked all over the place. He's busked in Europe and Toronto, and he finally figured out that East Nashville was a better place for a singer-songwriter than Joshua Tree, although Joshua Tree is getting there, I have to say.
Yeah, you and I have talked about the music scene coming into the high desert.
Yeah.
You're doing your part to try to keep it together and get those folks together.
Well, I my only dog in the race. I don't manage anybody. I'm nobody's publicist at the moment. I just want good music to go out and see. And when I moved here, we had the Alibi Room for a minute in downtown Palm Springs. I got to see all of about 2 or 3 shows. I thought I'd be there 2-3 times a week, but it closed down, unfortunately. And then Pappy's had some issues. But I wasted no time in finding out about First World, the Palms in Wonder Valley, a place I'd never heard of. The Red Dog Saloon, Spaghetti Western, and that's just the high desert. And then here in the low desert, in Indio, Little Street Music Hall in Old Town Indio, and a few other places. So, like I say, I just want to go out and hear music. So I've had to invent ways not to drive to L.A., although I do that my share of times as well. I've been to Idlewild, where they have a songwriters festival.
That's a great festival. There have been some good people come through there.
And I asked Victoria Williams if she had ever busked in the desert, and she said, yeah, a few times at the farmers market in Joshua Tree. Now, I got asked to speak at the 29 Palms Book Festival this past November in 29 Palms, and I was there one day and on a Friday, and it was just a regular day in 29 Palms. I get there on Saturday, took a hotel room, and I get there on Saturday, and there is a farmer's market going on, and there is a guy playing guitar by numbers. He has a backing track and rhythm machine, and it sounds like a bass and drums and keyboards and saxophone on a track, but he's playing guitar to it. And I don't consider that busking. My definition of busking is pretty wide. In fact, I've expanded it to schoolyards, subway stations, subway trains. One R&B writer who wrote for a lot of doo-wop vocal singing groups in New York told me that he used to hear singing groups in the men's room of the Brill Building, which is a big outpost of songwriters and
good
producers.
Acoustics in there.
Yeah, actually, he said that was
sung there, Randy.
Well,
so I
sung in my share of restrooms.
I decided to expand my definition of busking to that, especially to get Mike Stoller, who wrote Hound Dog and a number of other R&B classics in the book. But I don't go as far as to walk into Tommy Bahama's, say, and see or this 29 Palms festival and see a guy playing very mannered guitar to a track. And yeah, you can get those tracks, and yes, he's really playing his guitar, but to me, that's not busking. Busking is putting yourself in danger. Busking is eye contact. Busking is not knowing how the audience is going to react or whether they're going to react at all.
And you talk a lot in the book about police issues in various towns and stuff, and one major city where they had a law against it and they had to get rid of it because there was such an uproar. Can you share a little bit about some of those?
Well, there are a lot of cities to which that's the case. LA had its issue with buskers, although it's now legal. Chicago did as well.
It's a busker-friendly town.
It
It is. In fact, I did a couple of book events in LA where buskers played out in front. So it is so very legally. But I had where was I? In New Orleans, it wasn't always legal. And you go to New Orleans hoping to hear music on the street.
Of course, yes.
It's a music town. But the city council did not realize that. So I talked to a number of buskers who actually attended city council meetings. I talked to a music attorney who was very pro-busker, who has defended them and got some of the rules changed. And then there's an organization of musicians that's very heavily into busking. And they've actually devised some busking manners as well. Like
really?
If you see somebody at Royal and Toulouse Street or Royal and Decatur Street, or I don't know if those are actual intersections, and they seem to be there all the time, let them have their space.
That's their spot.
I talked to one duo, a married couple, David and Rosalind, who said that they used to have to get up at 3 a.m. and just wait. Not even an iPhone to play with, but just wait from 3 a.m. until there were people so that they could get the choicest part of Royal Street, which is a busking-free area, as is Jackson Square in New Orleans. But, and that brings up an overall thing that a lot of cities have figured out, that these days you can order anything you want on Amazon. It's there the next day. It's on your doorstep. You don't have to go to stores. You certainly don't have to go downtown. What's going to keep downtown alive? Well, busking is part of it. Maybe street theater, maybe street art, maybe this or that.
But street music is a big part of the ambience of a town.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's important. And my wife knows this. Anytime we see a street musician, I always tip them. Mm-hmm. No matter what, and whether they're great or not, except when they're playing to tracks.
Exactly. Well, I even tipped that. I even tipped that guy. But yes. But no, we spent the summer. You need a summer strategy here in the desert. We went to San Luis Obispo for 2 or 3 weeks, and every day we'd go to downtown San Luis Obispo, very urban downtown for a small city. Really, it feels like you're more in.
And they have a weekly street fair, actually, that ours is modeled on. Village Fest is modeled.
Exactly. Yeah. So even if somebody was taking a break or wasn't very good or playing all covers, I threw $5 in there. It was at the time I was working on the book, and I wanted to keep a good busker karma, and I was delighted, as I said, to come out of yoga in La Quinta to find a young man, very bohemian looking, a little dog, a violin, playing not even in front of Sprouts, but like in the parking lot proper. I mean, right near where I parked my car. I gave him some money, and I said all I want to do is take a few photos, and took a few photos and posted them on Instagram of La Quinta Street Singer. And I was delighted to see an accordion player at Starbucks in downtown Palm Springs.
Now, did you suggest to the guy with the dog and the violin that maybe he moved closer to the store where he'd catch more people?
I didn't change a thing. I didn't want to interfere with nature.
They're there for a reason.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of buskers are just comfortable being on the streets. Mm-hmm. They're not comfortable with structure and stuff like that. Were there any issues with some that tried to record, and once they got into the structure of recording, it just didn't go well?
No, most of them were able to make the transition, or make the transition occasionally back to work out new songs as buskers. Billy Bragg goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And no, I think that everybody seemed to be able to graduate that I spoke to the next level, except those that never did, and there were a few of those. But
it's a whole subculture unto itself.
Mm-hmm. It certainly taught Billy Bragg, a very well-known British singer-songwriter, kind of a protest singer. He made a Grammy Award-winning album with Wilco, and he was telling me that busking, which he did in the London Tube. I talked to a lot of people who played the London Tube, whether they were British or not, but he actually was. And he told me that the ability to tune up really fast and do that in front of people, instead of throwing a fit if his guitar gets out of tune in a festival, he just stops for a few minutes and fixes it. And he said that he took that element of being a busker with him. the informality and the improvisation of you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You never do know what's going to happen on the busking situation. What are some of the crazier stories that you discovered about what buskers had to deal with?
Well, so some of the crazier stories. I'm just cracking the book open to see if it doesn't jog my memory. But well, here's one. There's a group called Poi Dog Pondering who are from Honolulu, Hawaii, and yet
Which would be a lovely place to busk.
Well, actually, they tried, and they found that busking is very touristy there. That you have to do covers. Of other people's songs, but they wanted to do their own music, so they flew to the mainland, and then they busked from. They hitchhiked from California to Austin, Texas, which they heard was a good town for musicians, and they picked people up. They gave me a whole story of this Kerouacian road trip that they did, just a one-way trip from. They picked up, some bad seed hitchhikers, and finally they got to Austin and found that was a really welcome place. And they didn't have high expectations. As the guy told me, if he could afford a bottle of ragu and a container of some spaghetti and maybe an avocado, that was a good night for him.
Wow.
So, there was them. Poi Dog Pondering. There was an instance of a group called Old Crow Medicine Show, who are a kind of a old-timey country act. I guess they fall under the Americana aegis these days. But the lead singer said that one day his father went into a liquor store and was in there for a while and left the kid outside, and the kid started dancing, tap dancing, spontaneously, and discovered that people threw him money. So he became a singer and a street singer, and in time Old Crow Medicine Show, his band got signed, and they still go out to downtown Nashville and play.
Wow. I guess there's something to be said for just that environment.
Yeah.
Out on the street.
Well, there's one environment that I haven't touched on is Washington Square, Greenwich Village in New York, which of course was a big location for folk singers, and there's a book out on that just came out, which is next on my reading list. But it was, Greenwich Village is legendary for folk, and we just all saw that on the Dylan documentary.
Right.
There was a spontaneous riot that occurred when the cops, the New York police, came in and tried to shut busking down. It was a spontaneous beatnik riot, they called it, in 1961, and they won. They were victorious. And street singing is very much alive and legal in Washington Square and throughout New York. I think there are certain conditions, but nevertheless. And later on, there was an artist named David Peel walking around, and he was from Cuba, I believe, but he was based in New York now, and he's playing Greenwich Village, and an A&R scout from Elektra Records happens to see him playing the song called I Love Marijuana. So he goes to his boss, long before marijuana was legal, of course, and this is a controversial topic. So he goes to his boss at Elektra Records, and the boss says, sure, record him. So they go and tap into they recorded him in the park, live, one of the few albums really recorded as a busker, and they tapped into a light, a street light. I'm not even sure how you do that.
You've talked about that.
But so they tapped into that and got electricity to record and put out the album. It wasn't a big hit, but it was, it certainly got some press, and it was noticed on some levels. By the way, just an epilogue on David Peel, that artist. He went back to playing in the park, but he was later on discovered by John Lennon and Yoko Ono on one of their forays through New York, and they became good friends, and he was rediscovered another time.
Wow. Not every busker has the ability to be mobile or move around, right. But if they could, what are in the United States? Is it Nashville and New Orleans and?
I would say New Orleans and Austin.
Austin
likes to call itself live music capital of the world. Unfortunately, Austin is becoming Dallas in terms of population size.
Yeah, right.
If you go downtown, we're planning to go there later this year. I doubt I'll recognize it. Haven't been there since about 2017. But Austin is a live music town. There was the expression "keep Austin weird," but now that Austin is becoming Dallas, it's just maybe not so weird. So things like busking keep it weird, and there are certainly districts where busking is right at home. New Orleans, Washington Square, Venice Beach Boardwalk, 3rd Street Promenade, which I read a story is kind of atrophying in the post-pandemic
It is.
Amazon era, but street singers are welcome there.
Do you take some personal pride that you've turned busking into kind of mainstream with this book?
I am proud of having come up with a topic that was maybe dismissed by a few publishers as not marketable enough. But, the book came out and busking is in the current lexicon. I should say that this is not the first book on busking. There was one in 1981, which was a long time ago, called The Buskers. And it was a very good starting place for me. In fact, when I got it, I was all dejected. I thought, oh no, there goes my book. And the case of that California desert book that I was going to write. But in fact, it wasn't. It definitely started at the beginning in ancient Greece and ancient Rome and Shakespearean recitations. And Benjamin Franklin, who knew, would incorporate music into his oratorios as a founding father of America. So it goes back a long way.
So he was busking on the streets of Philadelphia?
He kind of was before there was a word. Philadelphia or New York, but yes, he was. So, but I think I took it up at a time that it hadn't been dealt with from about... I started... My book narrative really starts in about 1920. Blind Lemon Jefferson, Reverend Gary Davis, Reverend Pearlie Brown. They were all reverends or blind. But Blind Lemon Jefferson played in downtown Dallas and was discovered by folklorists Alan Lomax, John Lomax, and got to make some records. Reverend Gary Davis became... he actually moved from Durham, North Carolina, where he was playing at tobacco factories, to Greenwich Village in Harlem. And speaking of Harlem, on the cover of the book, there's a very interesting duo called Satan and Adam. And I've since become very good friends with Adam. Adam's the younger of the two. It was an older black man and a younger white guy. And the older black man named Satan, his real name was Sterling McGee, but he called himself Satan, was playing one day in Harlem, and this white guy happens to pass, and he has a harmonica in his pocket. But he was very deferential. He didn't try to steal Satan's show, but he asked if he could play, and Satan said yes. And they became an inseparable duo for quite some years, and made some records. And unfortunately, Satan then went missing. Turns out he had Alzheimer's. Adam happened to find him, and they did get him to the point where he could do a jazz fest, because music brings back memories even to those whose memories are atrophying. Music is a very key thing that even Alzheimer's patients seem to remember. Oh yeah,
music therapy is big for dementia patients.
So Adam, in the meantime, has moved to University of Mississippi, Oxford, Mississippi. He's a professor. He teaches English. He has written several books, some nonfiction, some fiction about busking. And I finally had the pleasure of meeting him. I did a busking panel at Americana Fest in Nashville this past September, and a few other buskers. He actually played harmonica through his little portable pig nose amp the way he did on the Harlem streets. Yeah. But, did Adam have any issues being the young white performer on the streets of Harlem ever? He did, but, he had some street sense, although he's from the suburbs in Connecticut. But I think Satan took good care of him, and in the end, people respected him.
Yeah. Is Adam kind of the biggest... well, you mentioned Violent Femmes. They were obviously huge. Elvis Costello was obviously huge.
But how did you... I would imagine it's easier to find the stories about the Violent Femmes or Elvis Costello, but how did you find some of these other more obscure buskers that have these interesting backstories?
Well, I kind of knew I kind of knew who to call, and I went to parties, and I would say, I'm working on a book on busking, and are you going to do so-and-so? And that's often how it started. There's one artist that I was not.
Well, who are these busker experts that you're hanging out with?
Well, exactly. I went to one New Year's Day party. It was I think it took me from about October to March March to October to write a book, but it was just about finished. And at a New Year's Eve party, somebody said, "Oh, you got to do Wild Man Fisher." Oh, did he busk? I'd heard of him through the Zappa connection, but I didn't know he busked. Or I happened to mention Victoria Williams, and she had busked in Shreveport, Louisiana, and in Venice Boardwalk, and at a farmer's market or two in Joshua Tree. So, everywhere I turned, I found out more about busking. I found out that there was although I was the one who, I shouldn't say I discovered him, he'd been discovered before, but this guy on Maxwell Street in Chicago, taking this way back to the beginning, there was a guy like him in Nashville. And an interesting story, because I was a white suburban kid who was seeing Maxwell Street, and there were all these street singers, including this one guy. In downtown Nashville, to this day, there was an F.W. Woolworth's. I think it might be the last F.W. Woolworth standing. And if you go inside, it's mainly a restaurant at this point, but they have a big display about civil rights. Apparently, it was a big site of civil rights riots and protests.
At the counter?
And then the counter.
Yeah.
So there was a street singer in front of that named Cortelia Clark. Much like my father took me to Maxwell Street, there was a record producer, a guy who became a record producer as an adult, but as a kid, he was taken to downtown Nashville shopping to Woolworth's by his mom, and there's the street singer named Cortelia Clark, and again, a blind street, kind of blues, kind of folk singer, and he ended up becoming this guy Michael Wiesner, who saw him as a kid, ended up being a fairly respectable producer, and actually convinced RCA Nashville. Now, Nashville Music Row, very provincial, very set in its ways, but he got them to sign this blind street singer.
Wow!
And not only that, but he actually managed, because the folk category of the Grammys was kind of an under the radar category. It's less under the radar nowadays.
Right.
You'd be honored to get a folk Grammy, but back then, Grammys were pop and R&B and country, and there was the folk category, the big deal. So this guy got all of his Nashville friends who were voting members of the Recording Academy to vote for this street singer. And he was up against, you'd have to look, but I think there's some real folk legends, like maybe Judy Collins,
wow,
people of that level. And then, interestingly, one other blind street singer was on the, this is 1967 Grammys in the folk category. There was another street singer that there's a chapter on in this book named Oliver Smith, who again was found one day by an Elektra Records A&R scout, taken right into the studio that day and never heard from again. But he was actually one of the nominees, because Elektra Records has some clout in the Grammys.
Yeah.
So, but Cortelia Clark ended up winning the Grammy. He only went on living a few more months. He never made any additional money. His album may have sold about 1,000 units. I mean, I know from working at record companies that 35, back in the days when records actually were records, 35,000 was a respectable number. Maybe 1,000, not so much.
Yeah.
But he ended up getting a Grammy. He ended up not going to the Grammys because he was ill. But the producer accepted the Grammy on his behalf, and he got to, he still lived in the projects in Nashville, but he was a Grammy winner.
Could the Grammys are there enough that they could include like a whole section on busking?
No,
not for awards, but to bring them on stage to promote the whole busking.
Well, that is certainly. I haven't pitched that to the Grammys yet. Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. There isn't a nominee this year that I'm aware of, and there certainly isn't a category because, Cortelia Clark and Oliver Smith were under folk, and, Ted Hawkins may have been under blues. And
has anybody done a documentary on busking?
Well, people have approached me about that, but, I'm nothing yet. I would love to do a documentary. I think finding
you need
a lot
to
of
hook
this
up with Ken Burns, because I feel like between this and then it would be a well-told story.
Yeah. Well, I think that clearing music is always the hard part of documentaries.
Right.
It's very costly, and I wouldn't want to be the guy to do that. I could be involved in some of the steering and some of the interviews.
But if it was all original street music, you probably don't have too many.
Well, that's true.
Right.
And by the way, you can find a whole lot of this on YouTube, as I found. If anybody's curious to hear Blind Arvella Gray on Maxwell Street, there are a few very grainy, very lo-fi videos of him playing on the streets. I think you can find Cortelia Clark playing on the streets as well.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
I got to look those up, because the way you draw people into the experience of being on the streets there with these performers, I'd love to be able to see examples of these on video.
The other thing I've done is, because I've done a few radio interviews now, everybody's asked me for a playlist, so I created a Spotify playlist named after the book, Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music. And, these aren't necessarily street performances, but they're the street singers sounding as primitive as I could find recordings of on Spotify and Bandcamp.
That had to be a passion project.
Oh, it was.
Yeah?
Well, the whole thing is a passion project.
Yeah, true.
For sure. Well, remarkable work. I mean, I'm really impressed with the level of research and meticulous detail that you went into to do this.
What's next for the book?
What's next for the book? Well,
Ken Burns.
Ken
Burns is next for the book.
We're doing a few more interviews for it.
Yeah?
I hope to do something in Memphis when I'm there for the Blues Music Awards in May. I've already done something at the Americana conference. If I go to South by Southwest, maybe there. But I've done a couple of great in-stores in L.A. Book Soup, a high school friend of mine from the Chicago suburbs, got up and did a set of 1930s blues. Again, a guy from the Chicago suburbs, white guy, lives in L.A., got there, brought a card chair, opened his guitar case. He's also a painter, a folklore painter, and displayed some of his paintings. But he opened for me at Book Soup, one of the more respected bookstores in L.A.
Very cool.
And probably the best bookstore in L.A.
And that was my West L.A. thing. In East L.A., not literally East L.A., but farther east in Echo Park, there's a store called Stories, and the one of the women who owned the store is also a concert promoter, and happened to know a Dixieland band who come out of the Silver Lake Music Conservatory. And so a Dixieland band greeted me as I was arriving in Echo Park.
That's pretty cool.
Playing out in front at sunset around Glendale Boulevard in Echo Park.
Yeah.
So, I've tried to entice our bookstores here in the desert. I'm having better luck in L.A. and
Really?
Have you talked to Just Fabulous, Stephen Monkarsh?
I haven't.
Okay, we'll connect you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
They do great book signings. That's good. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. It was so funny because this is the product that you didn't want to talk about.
That's right.
In our season 1,
and what's the next product you didn't want to talk about?
Well, I in 2 years I'll see with another project that I'm not ready to talk about.
All right. Well, we'll be season 8 by then.
Yes. Yeah.
12.
We already know who our first guest is going to be.
15.
I don't know.
Who knows?
3 episodes a season.
I've got a lot of catching up to equal the number of times Bruce Fessier has been on. But,
by the way, our best wishes to Mr. Fessier,
I love Bruce.
Tried to play.
He's playing street
Magic
hoops.
Johnson.
He was basically busking with
busking with a basketball.
He ended up busking his hip is what happened.
So our best to the busker.
All right. Cary, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys.
It's rare that we have a repeat guest, so consider yourself in an elite group.
I am honored.
Elite group. Thank you so much. Again, the book is called Down on the Corner, Adventures in Busking and Street Music. It's available at Amazon and other great booksellers.
And bookshops.org. If you want to shop indie, bookshops.org. You can even give credit to your local indie bookstore.
Oh, very nice. Bookshops.org.
Whether that's Book Soup or Powell's or Bookseller in Chicago or I'm blanking on the one in New York, but bookshop.org.
Good.
Well, we look forward to the biography that you're going to tell us about next time.
And the documentary with Ken Burns.
I just can't wait to hear Peter Coyote reading all the names that have been listed. It's going to be phenomenal.
As soon as Peter figures out what busking is.
Yeah, well, I can just hear him busking. It's going to be fantastic. Yeah. All right. Once again, this is Big Conversations Little Bar. My name is Patrick Evans. Our guest, Cary Baker. Get his book. Our producer, John McMullen. The strong silent type today, anyway. And, of course, the silver fox of the airwaves, Randy Florence.
The loud, not silent.
Thank you so much, guys, for listening. We're available wherever you find your podcast, but you can subscribe on our website, and that way you never miss an episode of Big Conversations Little Bar. Our thanks to the McCallum Theater. Our thanks to Skip Page, the Little Bar, and the entire team here for making us feel right at home, because we're going to hang out here for the next 6 hours. Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Big Conversations Little Bar. Recorded on location at Skip Page's Little Bar in Palm Desert, California, and presented by the McCallum Theater. Online at McCallumTheater.org. This program is a production of the Mutual Broadcasting System. All episodes are available from BigConversationsLittleBar.com and most major podcast portals.
Meet your neighbors, fascinating and grand. Each conversation a wave on the sand. Raise your glass and join the ride, where stories and dreams fully collide. At Big Conversations Little Bar, brought to you by McCallum, our guiding stars. From movie, stage, and TV's delight, join us for a captivating morning, noon, or night. So gather round at Skip's Little Bar, where stories travel from near and far. Big conversations where they unfold, with Patrick and Randy, tales retold.